What is up, boys and girls? Welcome to another segment for our Project AP1 Honda S2000. Today we're going to be going over how to do your own valve adjustment. This is something that I think is really beneficial for people to know how to do themselves. I know this is a service that often people pay for, or they bring their car to the dealer for. I want to say a dealer valve adjustment is $400 or $350. It's not very cheap. So it would be really beneficial for you to do this yourself. It's not terribly hard. I'm going to go over the process now. But what do we mean when we say we're going to set valveless or check our valves or do a valve adjustment? What's really going on? So I have a S2000 camshaft here. We have our lobes, our primary and our VTEC lobes, but what we're going to be focusing on is what we call the base circle of the cam. And that is the part of the camshaft that when it's spinning, it is not actually touching the roller rocker in the S2000. Now, some cars that don't use roller rockers, like say the Miata, the camshafts there just beat on to the lifter, so their lifter bucket. But either way, the premise is the same. It's the clearance that the camshaft has when the engine is cold, where this does not interfere. That's your valve lash or your lash setting. So in the case of the S2000, we are going to start with cylinder number 1. We want everything in top dead center. What that will do on cylinder number 1, top dead center, is the cam lobes are going to be like this. Pretend this is our intake side. Well, the intake lobes will be like this, and then our exhaust side will look like this. But the point is that the base circle is what's facing the roller rocker, and we're able to get a feeler gauge in there to check the actual clearance to make sure that it is within spec. So for Hondas, the intake side is 8 thousandths and the exhaust side is 10 thousandths. That's the factory lash spec, the set of Brian Crowder stage 2 cams. I'm sorry, not Brian Crowder, Belade cams I'm going to be adjusting. This is my Brian Crowder cam that was in there. They use the factory lash setting, and we're going to bring it right down to the bottom. So that's the bottom of the range. I think you can actually go a little bit bigger per the book. It's something around 3 thousandths is the range that is considered in spec, but we're going to go right to the lowest clearance, because what that's going to do is ensure that when the cam is hitting on the roller rocker, the valve is opening as much as it can possibly go safely. So we are checking the clearance in here. The reason why exhaust is always a little bit looser than intake is because exhaust gets hotter. So we have to take into account that metal expands when it's hot, and that's going to close that clearance up a little bit. If we're too tight on our valve lash clearance, it's going to float the valve. Floating the valve means that it is always open, and that's no good. That causes bleed off, we lose compression. You could potentially cause piston to valve impact, although I don't think you really will if you're pretty close within range, but we certainly don't want to float the valve. So to do this job, there are a couple things that are very important to have. I'm going to show you the tools that I use. First off, and it may vary depending on the motor. I want to say on the BP Miata engines, I don't use these feelers. I think I use straight feelers, but get yourself a set of feeler gauges. Ones that have a bend in them, I don't know what the degree of bend here is. These I find are the most useful for the S2000's head. Just the way the engine sits in the car and the way the end of the castings, having something that can kick up like this makes it much easier to get in there. You'll see that in a moment when I actually show you how to adjust this, that if I'm putting a little bit of pressure on the feeler gauge, it makes the clearance feel much tighter. So it's important to have something with the bend where you can let go of it and let it be flat between the rocker and the cam lobe. So again, these ones you can remove the gauges. I'm not going to do it right now, but you'll see when I go to do the last adjustment, I'm not keeping the feeler on here. Don't do that, because the weight of these are going to throw off what it feels like when it's bending down. So you're going to take the individual feeler gauges off to do the adjustment. So these are handy. You should always have these anyways. And then second is a valve adjustment tool. Now these are not particularly specific to any engine. Some engines use the same tool, it just depends on what the engine is. Miatas don't have this system. So Miatas, you're dealing with shims. It's a very archaic method. I don't like it. It takes a lot longer to set lash properly if it's off. Honda system is wonderful, and all Honda engines are adjustable as far as the VTEC stuff goes, at least to my knowledge. It's a superior system, it's wonderful, and it's very easy to adjust. So they use this type of valve adjustment tool, and what this is this is 10 millimeter, that's what Honda sizing is. So you have a 10 millimeter hex on the end here, and inside there's a flathead screwdriver here. So basically what we're doing is we're gonna come down from the top, we grab the valve adjustment screw with the flathead, and then with the 10 millimeter we can loosen the holder, and then once it's loosened we can use the Phillips flathead to either close or loosen the valve lash gap. So, and then once we're there, we hold it in place very carefully and we can tighten it back up. I'm showing you this outside the car because while I'm doing it actually in the engine bay, it's kind of hard to see what's going on to get everything clearly in frame, but that's what we're going to be doing. So with that said, I will show you now how to do a valve adjustment, kind of what to look for in the feeler gauge. And I will say this, you do want to make sure that there's a little bit of drag on the gauge. You know, how tight do you want to go? When I'm going right to that clearance, I probably go a little bit tighter than what I'm going to show you in the video just because I want to make this a little bit easier. It becomes a little bit of a muscle memory thing. If you've never done this before and you know somebody who knows how to do it, ask them to feel the feeler gauge and kind of beat that into your muscle memory so you know exactly how much drag is supposed to be on the gauge. What I'm going to show you is a little bit more universal. It may not run it right to the tightest spec as intended as what I'm going to be doing, but it will definitely put you within the range. You certainly will not be out of spec. Again, we have a 3/1000 range to show you. Probably what I'm going to show you to would be like 8.5 thousandths where the clearance is. I'm going to go a little bit tighter because the drag is like, I want it right at the 8 thousandths and the 10 thousandths mark, intake exhaust. So just bear that in mind. So let's dive into it. So to begin, we're going to set our motor to top dead center. Indicated by my timing cam gears and the idler gear. This allows us to do cylinder number 1. We can see our cam lobes are both pointing up. We have the base circles facing the rocker. That's where we're going to set our cold lash clearance. Once we're done with cylinder number 1, we're going to rotate the engine 90 degrees and then we'll move on to cylinder number 3. But you don't really need to count the degrees in rotation, you just got to look at the cam lobes. You need the base circle, which is the non-lobe part of the cam facing the rocker, and you can see intake, the lobes are up, exhaust, the lobes are up, and that's at top dead center, and that's how we're going to do each one of the cylinders. Okay, so here is our exhaust side. Again, the clearance is 10 thousandths, so I have a 10 thousandths feeler gauge here. So you want to get this, you have to be very mindful of the angle of the feeler gauge going in here, because if you look, when I have resistance here, I'm stuck, but it's because I'm bending the gauge. If I go flat and I get in here, look at the gauge moves freely. So this is something you got to be careful of. This is why I like these angled gauges, is because you can let go of them and they'll have a straight plane to the top of the retainer. So you give you an idea of really what your clearance is. If I pull up a little bit on this, it gets a lot tighter. It's very stiff. So you have to be careful of this as you go in and out. Basically, the clearance that you want to get this to is just so there's like a little bit of resistance on here. You don't want to be able to let go of it and have it wiggle freely. This is bigger than 10 thousandths here. So with my tool, again, I'm doing this with one hand. If I go and I start to, let me grab the thread here. Okay, if I start to tighten the feeler gauge just a hair, now I'm starting to get more resistance. Not enough. This is really not easy to do with one hand. So just another hair. Okay, there we go. So now you can see I still got free play, but it will stay. That's kind of like where I try to go by, and there's resistance as I'm moving across, but if I get the blade flat, it goes in. There's my 10 thousandths gap. So it's like right there on where it's got to be. I can move this around and it holds it in place. Because again, there's a little bit of a bend that's gonna close the clearance a little bit and put more resistance on the feeler gauge. But if you look, I can get it flat and move it back and forth. There's my 10 thousandths gap. That's where I'm going to run this. So I'm just going to tighten this down with my tool. I need two hands to do this because I have to hold the adjustment screw, and that's it. So here, I'll do a further out shot. Okay, so being zoomed out. Gonna hold the valve in place with the screwdriver head and then tighten this down. And now I check it again. Now I'm a little bit too tight. There's a little bit too much resistance in here, and I can't get this in and out as easily as I wanted to, so we gotta loosen it just a titch. And there we go. There's my clearance. All right, boys and girls, that is it. So a couple of things I do want to make note of. What you saw in the time lapse there, looked like I was tensioning the screws quite a bit. That's because I just installed fresh cams in the car, so I had to loosen the rocker assemblies up completely. When you go to make your adjustments, you should not have to be turning stuff that much. It should literally just be a quick loosen up just a little bit so you can turn that screw, and double check everything, make sure that it's there. Also, when you tighten, check it again, because it is very easy when you're putting a little bit of torque on that to get that wrong. Now, I don't torque those with a torque wrench. I just do that by muscle memory. It's not very tight. I want to say it's probably somewhere around 16 foot-pounds. It may even be a little bit less than that. It's not much, and it will hold it in place. And the last thing, I know I said this when I was explaining cold lash versus like hot because it grows. When you do a valve adjustment, you want the engine cold. So let it cool down. I think it could be like a little bit of warmth to it, but bear in mind that may change the clearance because metal expands when it's hot. So if you could do it on a stone cold engine, that's most ideal. That's it for this one, guys. If you have any questions about this procedure, drop them below. I will gladly answer them. Other than that, support our channel. Check out slipanglemedia.com. Look at our webinar section where we give away tuner parts on there. It helps us support doing what we do without having to ask you guys for donations or Patreon. It gives you a chance to win those parts for very low investment. And then you also get some private one-on-one time with Matt and I, because we do a live review on them. You get to ask us questions and engage with us during the reviews. And it's just like kind of more of a fun, homely thing that we offer. So check them out and like and subscribe if you like this content. If you think it sucks, tell us that in the comments. We want to hear that too. But that's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Till next time.